The fire blazed like a scene from a nightmare, consuming the barn I had built with my own hands. Flames climbed its walls as thick black smoke billowed into the sky, and the wood snapped and burst apart in the heat. From the back pasture, my horses cried out in panic, their screams nearly drowned by the faint wail of distant sirens. But I knew they had arrived too late. Everything I loved, everything I had built, was already slipping away. I had just gotten back from town, a bag of feed still in my truck when I saw the horror unfold. This wasn't a stray spark or a brush fire. It was deliberate. It was arson, no lightning, no accident. Someone had done this on purpose, and the detail that still sends a shiver down my spine, scrawled across the mailbox in large, red spray-painted letters, were the words, "Should have joined the shoe." I stood there paralyzed, my heart hammering in my chest, hands trembling as I dialed 911. Deep down, I already knew who was behind it. They'd been making threats for months, though I never believed they'd actually take it this far. But then I saw the black SUV tearing away from the back of my property, speeding down the service road the HOA used to reach the adjacent lots. That was all the confirmation I needed. In that instant I knew they'd picked the wrong rancher to mess with. Let me take you back to where this all began. Before the fire, before the vandalism, before I had any clue what a homeowners association was truly capable of. 6 months ago, I left Arizona and moved to rural Texas. My name's Troy Caldwell. I'm 43, a veteran, and after leaving the service, I spent years saving up to buy the ranch I'd always dreamed of. I found it, a stunning 15-acre spread right on the edge of a high-end gated community called Whispering Pines. The best part? My property wasn't part of the HOA. The deed spelled that out clearly. That's what sold me on it. Freedom. I wanted to grow what I wanted, ride my horses, live without someone looking over my shoulder. A week after moving in, I met him. He walked up with a stiff smile and a clipboard. "Good morning," he said, all fake charm. "I'm president of the Whispering Pines HOA. We're excited to welcome you to our family." I didn't even open the gate. "I'm not in your family," I told him flatly. He gestured toward the community behind my land. "Technically, you share access roads and landscape views. That gives us jurisdiction." I nearly laughed in his face. "No, it doesn't. My deed says I'm independent. You've got no authority here." He cleared his throat, visibly irritated. "We'll see about that." That was my first taste of how petty and overreaching these HOA people could be. A week later, someone slashed 2 of my truck tires. Not long after, my water line mysteriously burst. I had cameras installed, got a lawyer too. For a while it seemed like things had settled down. I thought they might have finally backed off. But then came the 4th of July party. A few fellow veterans came by and we spent the evening skeet shooting behind the barn. We had a small bonfire and grilled some ribs. Nothing rowdy, no blaring music, just old friends catching up. The next morning, I found an envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. Inside were claims of noise violations, fire hazards, and public disturbances, along with a warning: register your property with the Whispering Pines HOA immediately or face a community lawsuit. That was the moment I realized they wouldn't stop until I either sold the ranch or caved to their demands. I brought the letter to my lawyer, Martha Sims, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who didn't flinch. She looked it over, smirked, and said, "They have no authority. Let them sue. We'll bury them." But even with her confidence, something about the situation didn't sit right with me. 2 weeks later, my barn lights were shot out. Not broken, shot, likely with a pellet gun. The cameras didn't catch anything. Whoever did it knew exactly where the blind spots were. A clear message. I filed a police report and made my position known to the HOA in no uncertain terms. I wasn't joining. Ever. Then everything went quiet. Too quiet. Days turned into weeks. I got back to fixing the barn, replaced the lights, started planting. Again, I thought maybe things were finally settling down. And then came the fire. I had gone into town for supplies, leaving the property empty except for the animals out back. When I returned, the front barn was already engulfed in flames. It moved fast, too fast. The fire department later confirmed it started in 3 different spots. Clear evidence of arson. Traces of accelerant sealed it. This wasn't some freak accident. Someone had done this on purpose. As I stood there watching the fire devour everything, my tools, my hay, my memories, I felt something inside me break. Not with fear or grief, with fury. Because this wasn't just a fire. It was a declaration, a warning shot. And they'd just turned this into a war. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my truck with my shotgun at my side, watching, waiting, ready if they came back. My lawyer, Martha, came by the next morning after I called her. I walked her straight to the mailbox, showed her the spray-painted message. She didn't say a word for a long time, just stared. Finally, she said, "We're suing them for every dollar they've got." I nodded and replied, $600,000. That's what I lost. The barn, animals, equipment, fencing, vehicles. She didn't flinch. "We'll start with that," she said. But just as we wrapped up our conversation, something caught my eye behind the charred remains of the barn, a twisted, half-melted piece of metal. I walked over and picked it up. It looked like a piece of a gas can, but there was something stuck to it. A sticker. From Whispering Pines Landscaping Company. My breath caught. "That's from them," I said, pointing. "I've seen their trucks around." Martha came over, crouched beside me, examined it, then slowly stood. What she said next froze me. "Troy, they were on your property." Right then, a gust of wind blew through the remains of the barn, and with it came the strong, unmistakable scent of gasoline. The fire investigators confirmed it the next day. Gasoline had been used to start the blaze, and not just any gasoline. It contained a red dye additive, the kind commonly used by commercial landscaping companies. I handed the melted piece with the Whispering Pines sticker directly to the fire chief. He looked at it, then looked at me and sighed, muttering, "This smells like more than just a fire." I didn't respond, just gave a small nod. But inside I was burning hotter than the barn ever had. That evening, Martha called with more news. Bad news. "They've lawyered up," she said. "Who?" I asked, pacing across my smoke-scented living room, the stench still thick even from 100 feet away. "Whispering Pines HOA. Their president, Brandon Holbrook, hired counsel this morning." I clenched my jaw. "Let me guess. They're planning to sue me again." Her response was worse than I imagined. "They're claiming you started the fire yourself, for insurance." I stopped in my tracks. "You're kidding." "I wish I were," she said. "They're trying to flip the script before we can act. They don't even know the truth. I didn't have insurance on the barn yet. I was finalizing it this week." She paused. "Then they picked the wrong lie to tell." In the days that followed, investigators came and went. News reporters hovered at the gates, and neighbors from Whispering Pines started looking at me like I was the problem. Like I'd brought chaos to their perfect little world. I stayed quiet and let them talk. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Martha and I built our case. She filed a formal lawsuit against the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association and Brandon Holbrook personally for property damage, intimidation, trespassing, and emotional distress. Total, $600,000. We weren't playing anymore. I got to work, rebuilding. Friends from my veteran support group showed up to help, no questions asked. The guys who came to help weren't just friends. They were old hands who knew their way around a ranch, men who could swing a hammer, fix a busted gate, or dig post holes without breaking stride. One of them, Steve, an ex-Marine with a limp, handed me a generator and said, "You held the line for this country, brother. Now we hold it for you." That hit me hard. It meant everything. While we rebuilt, I wasn't taking chances. I installed new motion sensor cameras, thermal imaging too. And I brought in backup, a 200-pound livestock guard dog named Gunner. Half Great Pyrenees, half Mastiff, all business. Little by little, life began creeping back into the place. The horses were okay, thank God. I'd moved them to a friend's ranch down the road after the fire, and they were safe. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was still coming. And I was right. One morning, I was jolted awake by a loud banging on my front door. Not a knock, a hard, deliberate pounding. Gunnar erupted into a frenzy of barking. I grabbed my shotgun and opened the door, ready for whatever came next. Standing there were 3 sheriff's deputies. One held a file. The other 2 flanked him like bodyguards. "Mr. Caldwell?" the lead one asked. "Yes, sir," I replied. "We have a warrant to inspect your property in connection with suspected fraud and arson." I blinked. "Fraud? Arson? Are you serious?" He nodded. "I'm afraid we are. They didn't arrest me, but they combed through my land like I was the one who lit the match, took photos, examined the ashes, walked through the ruins like detectives in a crime scene. The second they left, I called Martha. She let out a string of curses. "They're trying to bury you before the lawsuit gains traction," she said. "But they screwed up. One of those deputies, Samuels, he's from the next county. And his sister? She's one of the women from your veteran support group who came to help rebuild." Turns out Deputy Samuels later admitted to her, off the record, that the HOA had hired a private investigator. They were trying to dig up dirt on me, paint me as unstable, dangerous, and antisocial. The irony was suffocating. These people literally set fire to my property because I refused to join their HOA, attend their potlucks, or pay for their overpriced lawn service. And now I was the one being labeled a threat. It felt like I was living in some twisted dystopia. But we didn't back down. Martha filed restraining orders against Brandon Holbrook and 2 HOA members who had trespassed on my land before. The court granted temporary protection orders, but the damage to my reputation was already rippling through the area. People were whispering. The media had questions. Some neighbors looked at me like I was the villain, but we kept pressing forward, because this wasn't just about a ranch anymore. It was about standing your ground when everything's stacked against you. The local news ran a story with the headline, "Veteran Rancher or Firebug, HOA and Resident Locked in Legal Firestorm." They used a photo of me from an old Facebook album, a camping trip where I looked wild and scruffy like some kind of doomsday prepper. It was deliberate, meant to sway perception. Martha told me not to let it get under my skin. "This is exactly the kind of story juries hate," she said. "HOA burns down your land, then paints you as the villain. It's classic overreach. People don't like bullies." She was right, but I didn't just want a courtroom win. I wanted the truth out there for everyone to see, so I started telling my story. I posted on veteran forums, called into local radio shows, even dropped my experience on Reddit, and it caught fire. Messages poured in, dozens, then hundreds, from across the country. People shared their own HOA horror stories. It was like I had opened a door no one dared touch. But with that exposure came something else. One night around 3 a.m., Gunnar lost it, barking, snarling, pacing like he was ready to take down a bear. I jolted awake, heart pounding like a war drum, grabbed my shotgun, hit the floodlights, and what I saw stopped me cold. Spray paint. Again. But not on the mailbox this time. On the side of my house, in the same angry red. "Drop the case or else." Beneath it, nailed to my fence post, was a dead squirrel. My breath caught, my fists clenched. This wasn't vandalism anymore. This was a threat. Gunnar growled low beside me, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the fence like he could smell whoever had been there. I called the sheriff immediately. They arrived about 20 minutes later. This time it was Deputy Ward. Older, grizzled, mirrored sunglasses, even in the dead of night. He looked at the wall, the carcass, the footage from my new cameras. His jaw tightened. "They're escalating," he muttered. I nodded. "They want to scare me, but they're only making me stronger." That morning, I scrubbed the paint off. My house myself. No one from Whispering Pines showed up. No apology, no denial. Just that heavy, guilty silence that screams louder than words. Martha filed another police complaint, this time for criminal intimidation. She also filed a motion to fast-track our lawsuit, citing harassment and retaliation, and while the HOA kept trying to play dirty behind the scenes, my story kept spreading. Rancher forums, homeowner rights groups, veteran communities, they were all watching. And the more they watched, the angrier they got. The more people spoke up, and I knew deep down that the HOA was starting to feel the heat. Brandon Holbrook, the smug president of the HOA, made his move to do damage control. Through his lawyer, he released a polished statement claiming that Whispering Pines had no involvement in the unfortunate fire on my property. Any attempt to link our organization to criminal behavior is defamatory, the statement read. But no one was buying it, especially not after the leak. That leak came from Lisa Kendrick, a former HOA board member, who reached out to me anonymously. She said she'd resigned 2 months earlier, sick to her stomach over what the board had been planning. After some back and forth, I convinced her to come forward. She sent me 3 internal emails between Brandon and the rest of the board. 1. Line hit like a hammer. If he refuses to join, we'll make it impossible for him to stay. Either he sells or he folds. Another one said, we can't let an outsider deface the view of our community. His barn's a rotten tooth on a perfect smile. Those words knocked the wind out of me. This had never been about rules or neighborhood codes. It was about ego, power, control, vanity. Lisa agreed to give a sworn statement in court. When I told Martha, her voice actually shook. Troy, this is enough to bury them. We've got motive, threats, and now internal proof. It's over. I wanted to believe her. I really did, but I also knew the HOA wasn't done. Not yet. 2 days later, my water line was cut. Again, the underground main. In the Texas heat, with livestock, no water, is a crisis. I called a plumber who confirmed what I already suspected. It was tampered with, no question. My fury burned like the fire that gutted my barn, but I didn't back down. We logged the damage and updated our case. Word around town was the HOA's lawyer was sweating bullets. I heard through the grapevine that they floated a settlement offer, $50,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. Just disappear, take the money, shut your mouth. But this wasn't about money anymore. I was in this for every homeowner who'd ever been. Bullied, every rancher pushed out by rich suburban overlords, every vet silenced or sidelined. I turned it down flat. Brandon must have thought I'd fold. He clearly didn't understand the kind of man he was dealing with. Then he made his fatal mistake. One morning, as I checked the new camera feeds, something froze me cold. There they were, James and Patricia, 2 Whispering Pines board members, walking along the back edge of my property, near the burned-out barn ruins. They were carrying something, a canister and what looked like rolled-up papers. They stayed just a few minutes, scanning the area nervously, like they were looking for something, or planting it. Then they disappeared back down the trail toward the Whispering Pines access point. And just like that, they proved me right. Again, I zoomed in on the footage and froze. The canister was marked with a flammable warning label and the papers beside. It were clearly blueprints. They were planning something again, maybe another fire, maybe something worse. I printed the footage and drove straight to the sheriff's department. Deputy Ward watched the video 3 times before turning to me. You know what this means, right? He asked. I nodded. They were coming back. That night, I stayed awake with a rifle across my lap, gunner lying at my feet, and floodlights casting harsh white light across the property. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found a legal notice taped to my gate. It was from the HOA, i.e., cease and desist, demanding I remove supposed defamatory content online, withdraw the lawsuit, and stop conducting unauthorized video surveillance of Whispering Pines residents. I laughed out loud. They'd been caught on camera trespassing with what looked like arson tools, and now they were accusing me of wrongdoing. That's when I called a press conference, right on my ranch, the ruined barn still in view, and Gunner by my side. I stood before a dozen local and regional news crews and told the entire story. I showed them the footage, read the threats, and held up the cease and desist letter before tearing it in half. "We don't negotiate with criminals," I said into the mic. The reporters went quiet, then someone started clapping, and others followed. By 6 p.m., the story was everywhere. That night, as I sat on the couch watching the coverage, I heard a loud crash, glass shattering. I ran into the front room and saw a cinder block lying on the floor beneath a broken window. Attached to it was a crumpled note with just 4 words: "This is your last." Glass crunched beneath my boots as I picked up the block, my hands trembling. With fury, the breeze slipped through the shattered pane, but I barely felt it. I unfolded the note. The message was short, cold. "This is your last." Last what? Last warning? Last day? Last breath? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. Whoever did this wasn't just angry. They were desperate. And desperate people are dangerous. Gunner stood rigid in the doorway, growling low, his ears aimed at the road as if he heard something I couldn't. I grabbed my shotgun and scanned the yard. The moonlight threw shadows across the ground. No cars, no figures, no footprints. Whoever it was, they were already gone. But I wasn't about to sit around waiting for whatever came next. I called the sheriff again, my 10th report in less than 2 months. Deputy Ward arrived not long after, jaw clenched, eyes heavy with fatigue. He looked over the shattered window, glanced at the note, then turned to me and said, "We'll add it to the report." That was it. I lost it. They'd burned down my barn, trespassed on my land, cut my water line, spray-painted threats on my fence, and now they were throwing bricks through my window. If I'd been in that room, I could have been seriously hurt. Ward raised his hands. "Troy, believe me, I want to help. But until we catch someone in the act, all we've got is circumstantial evidence." I didn't hesitate. "Then I guess I'll do the catching myself." That night, I overhauled everything. I installed 4 new security cameras, thermal, motion-activated, night vision, floodlights with sirens. A pressure alarm went into the driveway, ready to alert me if anyone crossed the gate. Gunner got a reinforced doghouse, complete with surveillance coverage around his post. They thought they were watching me, but now the tables had turned. I was watching them. The next day, Martha filed a motion requesting an emergency court hearing. The judge approved it. A formal trial date was set for 6 weeks out. That gave us a narrow window to gather any remaining evidence. And like clockwork, they slipped. 3 days later, Lisa Kendrick, former HOA board member turned whistleblower, called me again. Her voice trembled. "Troy, you're not going to believe what I just found." "Try me," I said. She explained that while reviewing old backup emails she'd forwarded to herself, she stumbled across one from Brandon. It was an invoice he'd sent along from a landscaping company, dated the day before the fire. The invoice included an item labeled "fuel storage barrels, off-site use." I felt my breath catch. "That's not standard for landscaping." "Exactly," she said. "And it was billed to the HOA, not to anyone personally." She forwarded the invoice to Martha immediately. There it was. Fuel barrels, billed the day before my barn burned down. Motive. Timeline. A paper trail. When Martha saw it, she nearly screamed over the phone. "We've got them. Oh, we've got them now." It finally felt like the tide was turning. But just when we thought we had momentum, they hit back. And this time, it wasn't anonymous. It happened while I was driving home from town. As I turned down the last road before my property, a black Escalade swerved violently into my lane. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, barely stopping in time. The SUV came to a halt sideways, blocking the entire road. Then the driver's door opened. Brandon Holbrook stepped out, sunglasses, pressed button-down dress shoes, like he'd just come from a boardroom. He wasn't alone. 2 other men got out, one holding a crowbar, the other wearing gloves. Brandon walked up to my driver's side window and tapped. I lowered it halfway, phone already recording in my lap. "You're making a mess, Troy," he said. I stared straight ahead. "Get out of the road." He smirked. You think you're going to win? You're not. You're just another bitter vet with a chip on his shoulder. Nobody's going to believe you over us. Tell that to the cameras, I said, angling my phone just enough so Brandon could see the screen recording. He stopped mid-step. The two men behind him shifted uneasily. His voice hardened. You're going to drop the lawsuit or you'll be buried in court so deep you'll forget what sunlight looks like. I leaned forward, calm but deliberate. You already burned down my barn, I said. If you think threats are going to scare me now, then you don't know a damn thing about the kind of man I am. I threw the truck in reverse and backed away slowly. They didn't follow, but Brandon kept watching, that smug expression slipping, for just a moment. When I got home, I filed a restraining order against him again. But this time, we had undeniable proof. Video of him blocking a public road, delivering threats, flanked by two men who looked ready to do more than talk. The court approved it. Brandon Holbrook was legally banned from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. We submitted the footage into evidence, along with the leaked invoice for fuel barrels, the spray-painted threats, the mutilated squirrel on my porch, the shattered window, and the sabotaged water line. The case was stacking up, and it was clear the trial was going to be a bloodbath. But just before we stepped into the courtroom, the situation took one final, unexpected turn. At 2:17 a.m., one of my new driveway alarms buzzed. I was still in bed, reached for my phone, and pulled up the live feed. At first, nothing. Then I saw it. Movement in the tall grass, someone crawling on their stomach, military style, toward the rebuilt shed. They were holding something, a bottle, a lighter. I zoomed in. It wasn't Brandon, not James, not Patricia. It was a teenager, couldn't have been older than 17, wearing a Whispering Pines volunteer cleanup crew shirt, and in his hand was a Molotov cocktail. My heart pounded. I hovered over the panic button. Gunner was already up, a low growl rising from his throat as he stared at the door. I hit the alarm. Instantly, floodlights exploded to life across the property. Sirens screamed. The boy panicked, dropped the bottle, thankfully unbroken, and scrambled backward before bolting into the night. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. The footage was clear as day. His face, the shirt, the weapon in hand. Deputies arrived within minutes. Ward reviewed the footage, jaw tight. "That's Jason Rohr," he said grimly. The name hit me like a gut punch. I knew his father, Henry Rohr, one of the loudest voices in the HOA, the same man who once shouted at a town meeting that my ranch was tanking their property values. Ward radioed it in. By sunrise, Jason was in custody, and just like that, though my entire house of cards began to fall, Jason cracked in under an hour. The kid was terrified. He admitted everything. The HOA board had promised him a $500 gift card if he taught Caldwell a lesson. They told him not to worry, that I'd be asleep, that I wouldn't see a thing, that it was just meant to scare me. Jason confessed they handed him the bottle, the fuel, even a drawn map marking exactly where to light the fire for maximum damage. And they were dumb enough to leave a trail, text messages, printed directions, receipts. All of it in writing. The sheriff's department collected every piece. When Martha saw the evidence, she was stunned. They used a teenager, a kid, as a pawn in their arson plot. "This isn't just a civil suit anymore," she said. "This is criminal conspiracy." That was only the beginning. With Jason's full confession, the sheriff's office launched an official criminal investigation into the HOA board. It wasn't just me versus them anymore. It was now the state of Texas versus Whispering Pines HOA. The trial was postponed to allow time for the new criminal evidence to be folded into the civil proceedings. Martha called it a blessing in disguise. She got to work refining every piece of our case, preparing for what she now called a courtroom massacre. While she prepped for battle, I focused on healing. Not from physical wounds, those had long since scarred over, but from the kind that fester quietly. I couldn't sleep through the night. I jumped at every creak in the house. I couldn't light a campfire without my pulse spiking, so I started small. I went fishing. I fixed the porch swing. I brought Gunner with me everywhere, even inside the feed store, where he quickly became a local favorite. I joined a veterans group at the rec center and told them my story. Some of them cried. One, an old Marine named Phil, put a hand on my shoulder and said, "I wish I'd stood up to the folks who tried to push me off my land. You did what most of us were too tired to do. That matters." Things were finally starting to feel calm again. Still enough to exhale, until a week before trial. That's when I found the letter. It wasn't in my mailbox. It was nailed to my front gate, typed. No return address, no signature, just 10 words that chilled me to the bone. "If you show up in court, you'll regret it. There won't be a second fire. It'll be final." I stood there holding it as Gunner paced beside me, ears alert. Final. The word echoed in my head. This wasn't a scare tactic anymore. This was a death threat. Cold, unflinching, personal. And for the first time since the fire, I hesitated. I considered leaving, packing up and walking away from it all. Whoever sent that letter wasn't just playing games. They were willing to burn everything down, including me, to protect their secrets. I stared at that piece of paper for what felt like a lifetime, wondering what kind of person, what kind of darkness, was hiding just a few miles from my doorstep. I had faced danger before, on foreign soil, in uniform, rifle in hand. But this was supposed to be home. This was supposed to be where peace lived. Then I looked out over my land, the shed, the rebuilt barn, the sun rising over my fields, and I remembered something my grandfather used to say. You don't leave your house because of termites. You burn the nest. So no, I wasn't going anywhere. I called Martha and forwarded the threat. She was silent on the other end of the line. Then, firmly, she said, "Troy, I'm doubling your security. I'm also filing an emergency motion with the judge. You're not just a victim anymore. You're a target." Within hours, 2 mobile patrol units were stationed near my front gate, and a sheriff's deputy started checking in twice a day. I reinforced every window with steel shutters, upgraded my surveillance network again, and had a silent panic button installed, directly wired to the sheriff's office. But all of that was just preparation. The real fight was about to begin, in court. The morning of the trial, the sky hung low and heavy with clouds. It felt like the whole town was holding its breath. I got to the courthouse early, alone, but steady. Brandon Holbrook showed up not long after, strutting in like a politician, navy suit, sunglasses, smug expression. Patricia James and Henry Rohr followed behind, walking with the weight of people who knew the tide had turned. Their confidence was gone. The courtroom filled quickly. Reporters lined the walls. I saw veterans I hadn't spoken to in years. Even some Whispering Pines residents showed up, their faces uncertain. Maybe they'd finally realized what had been happening behind the scenes. Maybe they just wanted to see how it ended. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Martha stood first. She didn't warm up. She went straight to the video, the security footage of Jason Rohr crawling through the grass with a Molotov cocktail. It played on a huge screen, and no one said a word. Jason's face was clear, the bottle in his hand unmistakable. The jury leaned in. Then came his testimony, every word documented, signed, and sworn. Jason admitted Brandon offered him money, gave him the supplies, even outlined where to light the fire. Said it was just to scare me, that I'd never know who did it. But he cracked. Told the truth, every bit of it. You could feel the shift in the room. The jury stiffened. The judge's expression darkened. Then Lisa Kendrick took the stand. She didn't hesitate. She talked about the internal emails she'd seen, emails labeled Operation Cleanup, Property Vision Alignment, and worse, she testified that the board had targeted me deliberately, that they saw me as a problem to be removed, that they had strategized every step quietly and then not so quietly. Finally, Martha brought out the letter, the one nailed to my gate. She read it aloud to the court. If you show up in court, you'll regret it. There won't be a second. Fire, it'll be final." The threat echoed in the courtroom like a gunshot. The jury stared. The judge didn't say a word. For the first time since this whole mess began, I saw fear in Brandon Holbrook's eyes. And that was only the beginning. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop as Martha held up the typed letter and read its chilling final line. "There won't be a second fire. It'll be final." Then she turned to the jury, her voice steady and composed. "This wasn't harassment," she said. "This was domestic terrorism, committed not by strangers but by a neighborhood committee." The room was silent. Then it was the defense's turn. Brandon's attorney did his best to deflect, claiming the fire was an unfortunate coincidence, that Jason acted on his own, and that the threatening letter had likely been forged by me in a desperate bid for attention or sympathy. The argument might have held some water until Martha dropped the final bomb. A forensic expert had matched the ink and toner composition of the letter to a specific model printer. That printer, registered and located inside Brandon Holbrook's HOA office. The reaction was immediate. A sharp intake of breath rippled across the courtroom. The jury stared. Even the judge blinked, visibly taken aback. Brandon's expression cracked, and his attorney stopped mid-sentence, scrambling his papers. It was over. But Martha wasn't done. She presented financial records pulled from the HOA's internal banking logs, records showing a $2,300 withdrawal just days before the fire, labeled as miscellaneous property maintenance. That money had gone to a landscaping company on paper, Shell Landscaping, registered to James Tillman's cousin, the same company, according to Jason Rohr's testimony, that had delivered the fuel containers. There was no recovering from that. The jury deliberated just 3 hours before returning with a verdict. Guilty on all counts of conspiracy to commit property destruction, criminal harassment, and reckless endangerment. They awarded me $600,000 in damages. But more than the money, the judgment included the forced dissolution of the Whispering Pines HOA board and permanent restraining orders against Brandon Holbrook, James Tillman, and Patricia James. As the verdict was read aloud, Brandon sat frozen, his jaw clenched, eyes blank. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but Brandon didn't respond. Patricia silently wept. James stared into the floor as if it might open up and swallow him whole. I didn't celebrate. I just closed my eyes. This wasn't triumph. It was release. Months of fear, paranoia, sleepless nights, and whispers in the dark had finally ended. I could breathe again. Later that afternoon, I stood on the courthouse steps, a bank of microphones in front of me, reporters crowding close. Some HOA members lingered behind dark sunglasses and hunched shoulders, pretending not to listen. I held up the letter, the threat that started it all. "This," I said, "is how cowards fight, not with open hands, not with truth, with paper and silence." But we don't live in the shadows anymore. I recounted everything, from the fire to the lawsuit to the forged zoning documents. I read aloud Jason Rohr's words, the kid they used as a pawn. His voice cracked in the transcript. When he admitted they told him it was just a joke, that it was nothing serious, and then I made my final move. Absolutely. Here's a polished and emotionally resonant rewrite of your closing scene that captures the power and meaning behind your story, while sharpening the pacing and phrasing for maximum impact. I filed a federal civil suit against the newly formed Whispering Pines Board and pressed criminal charges for forgery. This was no longer about land. It was about setting a precedent. Across the country, HOAs had grown more powerful than most city councils. They operated like private governments, unregulated, unchecked. And when left alone long enough, they stopped serving communities and started controlling them. They became mobs with logos, "Not in my town, not again." The public outcry was immediate. County officials issued a cease and desist order on all Whispering Pines zoning activity pending investigation. But that wasn't what broke them. What broke them came 2 weeks later. A federal prosecutor opened a criminal case, not just against Brandon Holbrook and the original board, but against the newly elected one too. Turns out the new president was Brandon's cousin, using her maiden name. Another member was his college roommate. They'd built a shadow board, a puppet council designed to carry on his agenda even after his conviction. Now they were all facing federal charges: conspiracy, forgery, fraud. By the time the dust settled, the HOA wasn't just exposed, it was obliterated. County officials dissolved its corporate charter. Residents voted 82% in favor of removing all HOA management from Whispering Pines. No more fines, no more patrols, no more committees with God complexes. It was just a street again. Some neighbors even apologized, not in letters or legal settlements, but with their hands. One morning, Beth and Jeremy Langford showed up with a group of residents, tools in hand. "We know what they did to you," Jeremy said, "and we stood by too long. Let us help fix your fence line. Let us rebuild what they tried to take. I didn't need the help, but I let them, not because I needed to heal the land, but because they needed to heal themselves. We worked all morning, hammering, painting, replacing boards. When we finished, Beth placed a sign in the dirt outside. My gate, a wooden sign, hand-painted, independent land, home of the free. We left it there. Months passed. The seasons changed. I started sleeping again. The land grew quiet. So did I. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the barn glowed golden in the light, I sat on the porch with Gunnar at my feet and thought about everything we'd been through. Remembered the fire, the way the flames tried to eat my dreams, the block through the window, the boy in the grass, the voice telling me it would be final, but most of all, I remembered what I'd learned. Freedom always has a cost, and when someone tries to take it with fear or fire or force, you don't bend, you don't run, you stand. Because home isn't just where you live, it's what you protect, and this ranch, this land, it's mine. No board, no threat, no signature will ever take it from me again.